People have talked about the Marvel formula for years. Usually they're talking about something superficial. Funny hero, villain with similar powers, a few jokes, a big CG action sequence at the end. Those are all things that Marvel movies have in common. But the actual formula is what's underneath. If you strip away all of the costumes and superpowers and world building, what you'll find is that Marvel keeps returning to the same basic story engine. And here it is, the Marvel formula. Status quo. Inciting Incident. Act 1 turn. Mission 1. Midpoint Explosion. Mission 2. Breakdown. Final choice. The new world. That's the checklist that I'm going to use throughout this series. Because once you see the repetition, the more interesting question isn't whether Marvel has a formula. Of course Marvel has a formula. The more interesting question is, if these movies keep using essentially the same story engine, then why are some Marvel movies better than others? That's what I want to explore, because two movies can check the same structural boxes and produce completely different results. So we're going to start with the movie that launched the MCU, Iron Man. And before we even get to the first box of the checklist, Iron Man does something clever. It starts in the wrong place. Teaser. The first thing we see in Iron Man is kind of, but not really, Tony Stark's status quo. It's essentially the beginning of the inciting incident. Tony is already in Afghanistan. He's riding in a military convoy. He's already done his presentation on the Jericho missile. And within a few minutes, the convoy is going to be attacked. But before the attack happens, the movie uses this tiny little window to tell us almost everything we need to know about our hero, Tony Stark. He's drinking in the back of a Humvee, the Fun V. He's sarcastic. He's completely comfortable around the soldiers. They're initially nervous around him, and within seconds he's got them laughing because he's infectious and he's got charisma. He's just cool. I mean, in the first few minutes of the movie, you know that they got the right fucking guy with Robert Downey Jr. What a steal, right? He embodies everything you would want Tony Stark to be. And so when the attack happens, we're already invested, even though we might not even like this guy because he's kind of a prick, but he's a charismatic prick. So the attack happens, the Humvee explodes, the soldiers are killed, and Tony scrambles for cover. And then the movie lands the image that contains the entire story. Tony sees the Stark Industries logo on the weapon sitting beside him. It explodes, then the movie jumps backwards. This structure is doing a lot of work, and it's a device that's used a lot in television shows and movies. John Wick does it, where you start at something exciting, and then you go back a couple days, and that action beat gives the movie enough room to devote to character work because you're already in it. You're already sold on the premise. So by starting with the inciting incident and moving backwards, what Favreau and the filmmakers did was allow them now time to have what turns out to be a very long Act 1. So now that we're back, we can focus on the true status quo, the ordinary world, the world of Tony Stark before he goes off to Afghanistan. And that includes gambling, the introduction to Obadiah and Tony's father, the legacy, the genius, Rhodey, Pepper, the reporter Christine, who he takes home, Stark Industries, the Jericho missile. All of that set up, all those characters, all those relationships, opposing worldviews, all of that stuff gets set up now, and it's not rushed because we've had the teaser. So what do we have? What do we have to work with in Iron Man with Tony Stark? And I'll only talk about the character map for the hero character in these scripts to keep these videos from getting too long. But I would note that all of the secondary characters in Iron Man do their job in the screenplay as far as having an initial answer to the thematic question, representing opposing worldviews, creating conflict, pushing Tony towards change. All of that is here, but let's only talk about Tony. So the central question in Iron Man is incredibly simple. Maybe you've heard it before. Does great power create great responsibility? Yeah, that's right. Iron Man has the exact same thematic question as Spider-Man. Tony Stark, though, a little bit different than Peter Parker because Tony Stark begins with a clear answer. No. Tony believes that creating power does not make him responsible for what somebody else does with it. He makes weapons, he sells the weapons, and after that, the responsibility belongs to somebody else. That's his worldview. and his worldview produces his main strategies. Tony gets through life with intelligence, confidence, charm, independence, and most importantly, control. Tony is always the smartest person in the room, and that's taught him that he should probably also be the person controlling the room. What you'll find throughout the script is that Tony's personality doesn't change. He's always Tony Stark. Sure, he might have some PTSD. He might be a little like messed up in the head, but he's always cool. He's always got something fun to say. You always want to be around him. He never shrinks into depression. We'll save that for future films. Tony remains Tony, but his outlook, his worldview, and his strategies evolve as he evolves. So back to the status quo. In Tony's ordinary life, his worldview and strategy rewards him. He's successful and comfortable in this, Tony Stark. It's not like he's taking the reporter home and he feels bad about it. He's very comfortable in his skin, which is why the change works so well, because it's not something that he even knew he had inside him. Pepper might have, right? Proof that Tony Stark has a heart. Pepper might see something in him, but Tony definitely doesn't because he's blind to it. He's having too much fun. So we go through all of this, we plant the seeds and all of the setup and payoff. Everything is put in there in that first part of Act 1. And then we catch up to the teaser with the inciting incident, convoy being attacked, and Tony nearly being killed by the 10 rings, by the very weapon that he designed and created. And even though it's all part of the lore, and we know he's got the glowing arc reactor in his chest, and it's part of the Iron Man character, this is a really great choice. And the way that Jon Favreau puts it on the screen is visual storytelling at its best. After the shrapnel is separated from his heart and he's got himself, hooked up to the car battery, what the visual is saying is that Tony cannot separate himself from the consequences of his technology anymore, from the consequences of what he's done, because they're literally inside of him. But this is still just the inciting incident. So, what makes an inciting incident different from an Act 1 turn from a lock? You can still abandon the adventure, abandon the mission at the inciting incident. So can Tony abandon the mission? Can he somehow not become Iron Man at this stage? Of course. He can cooperate. He can build the Jericho missile. He can try to, manipulate them, outthink them, escape somehow. But that's not what Tony does. At first he defies them and he says no, but that doesn't last very long. And so he has to come up with a plan. And so this whole sequence, the cave sequence, is that plan. So this is where the structure of Iron Man is kind of noteworthy in the MCU and just in storytelling in general, because an Act 1 generally takes up about 25% of your script. Tony doesn't get out of the cave until about 40 minutes into the movie. So that is an extremely long first act. So why does it work? Why doesn't it feel overly long? Why doesn't it feel like the screenplay architecture is breaking? It's because the cave sequence itself contains a 3-act structure. The cave sequence is a mini movie. It's a nested narrative. And this idea of a nested narrative is introduced in Iron Man, but Marvel ends up using it a lot in their movies. The opening of Thor is a nested narrative. The opening of Captain America, First Avenger, before Steve becomes Captain America, that's a nested narrative. It's got its own beginning, middle, and end. So let's walk through that nested narrative. The cave status quo. Tony wakes up in captivity. Yinsen has saved his life using an electromagnet connected to a car battery. Tony learns where he is, and he learns who controls the space. So what's the inciting incident? The 10 rings tell Tony to build the Jericho missile. Now captivity has a specific problem attached to it. The midpoint explosion of the cave. Tony sees Stark weapons everywhere. He sees what his company has put into the world, and now the cave is no longer just a prison. It's a warehouse full of Tony Stark's consequences, right? He's literally staring at his own consequences. He can't escape them. Before this, the mission was simple. Get out, escape. But now there's another question underneath. It's what have I created? What have I done? Frankenstein's monster kind of stuff. Tony continues building the armor, but now the mission carries different weight. The 10 rings become suspicious, time is running out, it's that domino effect, that snowball, that, getting towards the final battle, making that final battle feel inevitable. All of that is happening, condensed into this mini story in the cave. And then the plan collapses. The breakdown sequence, the lowest point sequence, the 10 rings realize that Tony's been deceiving them, the suit's not ready, the soldiers are coming. Tony can't solve the problem fast enough. There's a status bar moving very slowly, and he's stuck until it hits 100% and he can power up that suit. He cannot control the situation, so Yinsen makes a decision that Tony can't control. He sacrifices himself to buy Tony time. And this is so important for Tony's arc throughout not just this film, but all the way through Endgame. So obviously, if you've seen the movie, you know that Yinsen dies, and he gives Tony the challenge that will drive the rest of the movie. Don't waste your life. Don't let this be your legacy. With great power comes great responsibility. On to the cave final battle. Tony gets the Mark I online, and he fights his way through the camp. And before he leaves, he destroys all the weapon, lights everything on fire, and flies away. And so for the first time, Tony is actively destroying something that he created because he now understands what it does to other people. He flies away and he crashes and he's rescued. That's the end of the cave story. But its new world is simultaneously the end of that nested narrative and the beginning of Act 2. Because the Act 1 turn is the press conference. After he's rescued, reconnects with Pepper, grabs some product placement, shoves some Burger King in his face, he goes and he talks to the press. So at the press conference, Tony announces that Stark Industries is getting out of the weapons business. That sounds like a pretty good Mission 1 to me. It also sounds like if Lockheed Martin decided to start making toasters. Bad business model for a weapons company. That's what Obadiah is trying to say this whole time. So if Mission 1 is stop making weapons and do good for the world, how is he accomplishing that? Because the first half of Act 2 isn't Tony restructuring Stark Industries. It's not, converting things to agricultural designs, right? He's not doing any of that stuff. So what's he doing? Working on the arc reactor. The way Tony sees it is if he can perfect the power of the miniature arc reactor that he created, then he can really do some good in the world. So that's his big project. Here I'll just stop for a second and say that I think that the movie could have done a little bit better of a job of kind of hammering this point home, because on a surface level, when you look at this part of the movie, the fun and games section of the movie, he's just building the suit, testing the suit, having fun with Jarvis, flying around, right? But what's really going on is he's designing technology, doing R&D on himself to perfect a new form of technology that he can then later apply to other things. He says to Pepper when she's like, what are those? Is that a weapon? And he's like, no, this is a flight stabilizer, when they're really his repulsor rays. And he even says to Rhodey, what about a pilot who doesn't need a plane? And that's what his big thing that he's working on is, that Rhodey doesn't want to become a part of. When he's testing the Mark II, when he's flying around, all of his metrics and everything he's saying with Jarvis, it's all based on flight. It's all based on aerodynamics. He's not testing it as a weapon. He's testing it as a new piece of technology. So when he freezes and he falls, he has to solve the icing problem, so he changes the material on the suit. I think what the story engine is doing is it's setting up that first mission, but it's keeping the strategy that he had at the beginning, which is, I'm the smartest, I'm the best, I'm the most talented, I'm going to be in control, nobody else. If you think about it, it seems like this strategy is working. He's building the Mark II and the Mark III eventually, right? He's only been down in his workshop for like a few weeks, and look at all the progress he's made. And you think he's making progress as a person too, as a human, because he's connecting more with Pepper. He doesn't want the old arc reactor, but she insists. She turns it into the gift, proof that Tony has a heart. Obviously, that's not only a setup for the later payoff of him having to use it, but it shows that Pepper saw something in him and sees something in him that he's not ready to see. That's the opposing worldview. Opposing worldviews don't always have to cause tension. Opposing worldviews can be used to just push the protagonist towards change. And that's what Pepper's opposing worldview does. So, why does this fail? When does this fail? What's the midpoint explosion? Well, Tony's been in the basement for like 3 weeks, and everybody's speculating about what that means. Obadiah's already told him that the board was trying to get an injunction on him and that he's going out to New York to try to, fix everything. So when he sees that news broadcast about the party that he wasn't invited to, he's like, well, shit, I got to flip the script on this. I got to go out. I got to get out of my bubble. Even if it's only pretend, because maybe now, instead of being, the real playboy, maybe now he's Bruce Wayne, where he has to pretend to be that, that playboy, that bachelor, in order to conceal what he's doing in the basement. That's not really investigated in the film, but I think it's an interesting layer to the character that I read when I watched the movie. So at the party, we get the midpoint explosion in 2 chunks. The first is Christine. She tells him that his weapons are being used by the Ten Rings, and these pictures were taken yesterday. So that's the first thing. Is he's like, well, but all these things I'm doing, I thought I could control everything. So why isn't this strategy working? Why are these weapons still in the hands of the bad guys? And then the second gut punch is when Obadiah tells him, I'm the one. I'm the one. It's me. I'm the one who filed for the injunction. I'm pushing you out because I know what's best for this company. It's the beginning of Obadiah's turn as the villain, even though we don't know yet that he's the big bad, even though obviously he has to be. But he's still in shapeshifter mode. He hasn't completely turned into the villain. So now we just have Tony's world collapsing based on him not changing his strategies and his worldview. He can't fix this alone. He can't fix this by being the smartest person in the room. So what does he do? He changes the mission. And he puts on the suit and he goes to Gulmira. Mission 1 was about finding a better kind of power. Mission 2 is about using that power to take responsibility. So Tony personally puts himself between Stark weapons and their victims. And then he goes and he attacks the terrorists and he rescues the civilians and he destroys all the weapons. And this is where the suit changes function. This is where it becomes a weapon. Tony has now made a choice. He is going to use the technology and take full ownership and responsibility for what he's created. So that is the first domino to fall. Everything that comes after it is pushing straight towards that final battle, which is now inevitable. And slowly, Tony is changing how he views the world around him. He brings Rhodey in. He brings Pepper in. He's put them in danger because he knows that he can't do it all by himself. So we get Obadiah killing off Raza, who is the red herring. He was the fake villain, right? We thought he was the big bad. Obadiah is the big bad. So he kills all of them. And now we know the only threat left is Obadiah, and all of these things escalate, progressive escalation, up through Tony having Pepper go to his office to steal the files from the laptop. She's being put in danger with Obadiah there. Even though Tony doesn't know yet just how dangerous Obadiah is, he knows that this is, putting her in peril. She barely gets out before Obadiah realizes what she's doing, and she finds the big clue that he was working with the Ten Rings. We get a payoff from that first shot in the movie of the bag coming off of Tony's head. Pepper gets away because Agent Coulston is just, happens to be there because he needs to be there. It's another limitation. Look, Iron Man's not perfect. And I'll go into its flaws at the end here, but Coulston being there, he needed to be there as a convenience to the plot, and he also provides the connective tissue for the soon to be Marvel universe. So is a necessary. It's just like all of the fan service and world building that you get in all of these movies. You kind of have to separate that from the movie as a whole. It's just the reality of these franchises. All of that takes us to the breakdown. Obadiah literally ripping Tony's heart out, going full bad guy, stealing the arc reactor and leaving him to die. Up to this point, Tony has survived the entire movie through superiority and control. He's always ahead because he's always smarter. He builds the better machine, he understands the technology better than anybody else. But now Obadiah has the technology. He has the company, and he's built his own suit. Another plot hole, I mean, I don't know why Obadiah sticks around. He knows that Pepper's got all of the goods on him, and then he gets the arc reactor. Why does he just fucking, like, fly away to some country without extradition and build a kingdom there with this new technology that's going to make him $1 billion? I don't know. Instead, he decides to stick around and put on this giant suit so that he could have a final battle with Iron Man. Why? This is a superhero movie. That needs to happen. So, back to the movie. Tony's lying helpless on the floor. He can't save himself. And then the thing that keeps him alive is the original arc reactor that Pepper saved. Tony had dismissed it as obsolete. Pepper understood that it had meaning, even if it was only sentimental meaning. I mean, there's no way that she could know that he'd have to plug that in to stay alive. But the technologically inferior object survives because someone other than Tony saw value in it. And that just pushes Tony to accept that intelligence and personal control are not enough. He needs other people. That pressure's been building since the cave. And the breakdown takes away any possibility that Tony can keep pretending that he's entirely self-sufficient. The complete breakdown of the initial worldview and strategy. It checks the box. Down to the final choice, final battle. Tony chooses to go after Obadiah with the weaker reactor, 19% power. We know that he's not going to have to use all of that in the fight, but he's putting himself at risk to do it because he knows it needs to be done. So what does that do? Right here, this final choice, when he decides to go after Obadiah, changes his answer to the thematic question. Does great power create great responsibility? Fuck yeah. That's his new answer, because Tony Stark wouldn't just say yes, he'd say fuck yes. But the movie goes further than just changing his worldview, it changes his strategy also. Because even though we've got this huge fight, the first CG good guy versus CG bad guy fight in the MCU, we'll see a lot more of those. They're fighting, set up, we got the payoff of the freezing in the upper atmosphere. We've got this final confrontation between Tony and this father figure who is close to his father. I don't want to minimize all of the emotional work being done here, but what it all comes down to is, in the moment of truth, Tony can't win. He needs Pepper to push the button. He needs to sacrifice himself, and she needs to be okay with it. And that's what happens. She pushes the button. The reactor, gives us our first blue light to the sky that we'll start seeing in every Marvel movie. And she kills Obadiah, and she saves the day. She saves Tony. Tony is still Tony. He's still brilliant. He's still arrogant. He's still sarcastic and theatrical. His character hasn't been replaced. It's just that his strategy has evolved. And that's what makes his arc work. But we're not done, because we still have the new world. And I think, this is probably the most satisfying part of Iron Man. He's at the press conference. He's given his story, his cover story. And he's up there. He's got the cards. He's going to read them. But then he's still Tony. And he still wants the spotlight. And he still wants to be theatrical. And he still wants control. And so he throws the cover story away, stands up nice and tall and proud, and says, "I am Iron Man." What a great last line. But also, I am Iron Man means I am the weapon. I am the technology. I am not going to hide behind a cover story and deflect responsibility. I am now at one with my creation, and I own all the consequences. How different is that from him not being at the speech so that he could gamble, because he didn't want to have anything to do, even the accolades. He didn't want the credit. He didn't want the blame. He just wanted to gamble and take hot women home, and that's it, right? So that's Iron Man in a nutshell. Does it pass the Marvel formula? Status quo, yes. Inciting Incident, yes. Act 1 turn, yes. Mission 1, yes. Midpoint Explosion, yes. Mission 2, yes. Breakdown, yes. Final choice, final battle, yes. New world, Yes. But checking the boxes isn't why Iron Man works. And yes, Iron Man is full of problems. It's not a perfect movie. Um, Pepper stands around a parking lot pretty much the entire climax of the movie. Rhodey is pushed to the side and does really nothing at the end of the movie. It's a disservice to him. Obadiah becomes this cartoonish bad guy who doesn't act in any way consistent with who he was for the first half of the movie. The final battle is just two CG characters banging into each other. Agent Coulson is only there because he needs to be there. But all that being said, Iron Man still works. But not all Marvel movies are created equal. Next, we're going to see what happens when all of the boxes are checked, but the movie still doesn't work. Because the second film in phase 1 of the MCU is The Incredible Hulk. So I hope you join me for that. And if you have anything to say about Iron Man, you agree with me, disagree with me, put it in the comments below. And until next page, I'm Matt Weiner, and this is Fade In, a channel dedicated to the art of screenwriting.